ご夫婦でご主人が確か70超えてる方もご夫婦もいらっしゃって、その方たちは健康のために毎日少しずつっていう、やっぱり足を動かして体を動かしてっていう形なので、ある種スポーツとしては結構健康のためっていうのはいいんじゃないかなと思って。
While it may look easy, as with shooting games and fighting games, countless hours are spent perfecting these skills. Rhythm games, at their highest level, are a serious business.
In terms of the easiest settings, you may have 50 steps, maybe even less than that on the easier songs, because it's basically one step every few beats, or so to speak. I mean, even somebody who's not familiar with the game can keep up. Oh, look, there's a single arrow. I wonder what's happening then. Oh, I get it now. But if you put that up to the extreme settings, I mean, the highest level difficulty, you're bordering on 700 steps in the span of 1.5 to 2 minutes. And that's just crazy. I mean, to the casual person watching, they have no idea what's going on. It's just a huge blur. And it's not just with DDR as well. I mean, with the other music games, it's the same thing. I mean, you may have a series of columns coming down the screen or other icons, and you get them dense enough, nobody can read what's going on except somebody who's practiced it at such a level that they know what to expect. It's amusing for me personally to be able to do these things now that years ago, just watching them would make me go, wow, how did he do that? I mean, to be able to do that or perform at the same level is a very nice feeling. I mean, and to this day, even with over at this time 1,200 perfect scores over the DDR mixes, single, double, all the different modes, it's still nice to be able to get a full perfect combo or whatever. Just see that little flash, the flare at the end like that. It's a cheap thrill to see that. I still get a kick out of that to this day, even on something that's not necessarily that difficult.
You know, for foreigners, I'm sure Aaron's probably the best, so it's kind of like you see the big names and you see the big names at your local arcade, and if you see somebody at your local arcade that has, a top ranking, then that's kind of impressive.
Impressive to say the least. Aaron has helped create an online community for these games, sharing news and high scores from Japan via a popular web forum dedicated to rhythm games. Aaron and his close friends have been invited to travel to compete and showcase their abilities internationally.
See his name on the high score when you start a song, you know he's got to be pretty good. I mean, it's not easy to rank in the machines.
Part of the reason that I can get perfect scores is that I zone out. I mean, you lose yourself in the music, you focus on the beat, you focus on the patterns coming, you try not to worry about distractions or your score or anything along that nature. Just keep it going, because a great at the beginning of the song is the same as a great at the end of the song. It'll destroy your full perfect combo at the time. With the very first mixes of the music games were, I wouldn't say difficult at all, at least not in comparison to today's standards. So what was difficult back then is, well, a cakewalk in comparison today, partially because at the time nobody was used to the music genre. This was all new. I mean, just doing anything was a challenge. So once everybody got used to that, you had to ramp up the difficulty, so to speak. So at the time, there was a novelty to the music game genre. It was fun because those challenges were there because it was a unique experience. Whereas nowadays, the challenge is there because people already know the basics. They just want to push themselves to new limits.
The Japanese have been pushing the limits of gaming for the last 40 years. But at the end of the day, it's the social climate, the community, that keeps people coming back to arcades.
やっぱりそのスコアを頑張る目的としては、やっぱりいろんな人と戦って、いい勝負をすることで、いろんなライバルとか仲間を増やしていきたいっていうのがありますね。実際スコアをいっぱいやってきたおかげで、日本全国のいろんな友達ができましたし、そういう意味ではスコアを目指すというよりも友達を増やしたいっていう気持ちが強いです。
For most genres, high score is kind of dead, but for some things like music games and shooting games, it's still very much competitive. I think that Japanese arcades are just more about just, going out and just having fun. It's still a better image than in America, where it's kind of like, you play Nintendo all day from your mom's basement, then you go and play some other game. I think Japan is slightly better in that respect.
North America saw a similar rise to arcades in the 1980s, following the Space Invader craze, led by games like Donkey Kong, and Pac-Man.
My first arcade experience was probably when I was 8 years old in New York City. Went to an arcade called Chinatown Fair. There was a lot of people in there. I saw these arcade cabinets. There was like Pac-Man or like Gladius or like random shooting games, really old school games like Donkey Kong. None of the newest technology games, but mainly just like the Mortal Kombat phase, Street Fighter phase, Killer Instincts. Basically like the Super Nintendo / Genesis generation. So I always went back to arcade like almost every day, just playing like all these different types of games. Like it could be like action, platformer, or like a random fighting game, or even like a driving game. So I played all those type of games at my local arcade.
Arcade culture is a staple for many childhood memories for adults in North America. This influence has created a burgeoning field of rising professional gamers who grew up in these establishments and are working to bring them back to life.
I mean, I've been gaming since a very, very early age, like literally since before I can remember, I've been playing games. My first video game experience was versus Super Mario Brothers, which is the arcade version of, what eventually became the home console version of Super Mario Brothers. I was a 1-year-old when I played that arcade game, and my parents would stack up milk cartons at the convenience store where the arcade machine was. Lived in a very small town at this time, so the convenience store was like, where the new arcade games were at.
These experiences represent a growing population of gamers eager to relive their childhood memories.
Oh, arcades. When I first started going, probably like 5. And I used to have to like get on little short stepping ladders to reach the top of the joysticks and stuff like that. And I've been hooked with arcades ever since. But I was playing pretty much every game, whatever they had, whatever I could reach, however much money I had left on me, how many quarters I had, that's just what I played with.
My parents would drop me off, I would walk in, and the arcade that was local to my house, called Pirates Cove in Monterey Park, had like a dozen Street Fighter 2 machines. So you would walk in and you would just see everybody playing. And like, I was just a kid, so I wasn't any good. But, I was old enough to like understand, hey, like this is pretty cool. And so I guess that's just something that's kind of like stuck with me through the years, just because like it's always been there and it's always been fun.
While we all think back on our first arcade experiences with fond memories, the reality was that in North America, the reputation of arcades was far from pristine.
I think the first word that comes to mind is dark. Quite dark, just lit up by all the different monitors, like different electronic sounds. And as a kid, it was very, very appealing to go to somewhere like that where all the adults were playing something that you wouldn't have a chance to play at home. And I think it was at a time when arcades were kind of negatively looked upon. It's like a place where delinquents or those kind of go there. Obviously, it's tough when you're 12 versus people who are like in their 20s who have more money and go play wherever they want to.
In the West, if you want to go to an arcade and you're under 18, or under 16, you probably need your mom or your dad to drive you to the arcade. And then you're going to have your mom and dad drive you back home. So it's a terrible place to go for a date.
This negative image, alongside a lack of accessibility, led to a swift decline in popularity. By the late 90s, arcades had become scarce.
I guess like one of the things living in Japan that if you like video games, you notice very quickly is that they still have arcades. And growing up in Texas, I went to my local arcade a lot. But by the time that I was a teenager and was going to college, those arcades started to disappear. So I think that kind of nostalgia, that feeling that that this is something I used to do when I was a kid, and it doesn't exist anymore, but it still exists in Japan. And you can walk down the street and you can find a great arcade and play a bunch of games.
While it remains difficult to find an arcade in North America, in Japan, they're hard to ignore. Gaming is part of their everyday life. It's part of their culture.
The companies that make arcade games are Japanese, so there's that, it kind of exists. And granted, you had that in America as well. You had, American companies making arcade games, but then a lot of the, I guess, American game development moved more and more towards PC. So you kind of have that really strong backbone in Japan. The other thing is that you have the locations. Like, Sega not only makes arcade games, they own arcades. A lot of arcade developers that, are like that. So
you have this kind of, I guess, system already in place. Another reason is that, you know, you have population density. That in the sense that if you get off at a train station, you can probably walk to an arcade. In the US, you'd have to get in a car and drive usually, unless you lived in, for example, New York City or someplace like that. But generally you'd have to drive. And so why drive somewhere when you can play a video game at home? Kind of, you know, I guess that kind of situation really hurt arcades in the US.
So while there is clearly something to be said for the location and access, this isn't the sole reason for arcades failing in the Western world. Some would say that the arcades simply didn't grow up.
Some arcades have not really like adapted and evolved and changed. You know, it's still pretty much like put a quarter in to play. And I mean, you know, it's kind of like a very old business model, you know. Not playing games at a public place, that's obviously something that, like, you know, is going to continue in the future. But the actual idea of putting a physical coin into a machine to play until you die is kind of like an idea that somebody came up with, what, like 30, 40 years ago now. You know, like, that's part of why they're dying.
In Japan, gaming is accepted, and I think in the States, it's accepted as simply a time-wasting hobby. And I think it's anything but that. Arcades didn't necessarily die, they just didn't grow up. You know, they were always focusing on basically teenagers.
And when you focus on the youth of America, you better have a positive influence. Otherwise, Uncle Sam is coming for you.
The US government is like, arcades are bad. They make our little kids do drugs and kill people. You have movies like Saw. You don't think a person would do that when they see Saw, but you think, oh, someone punching in the face with Ryu can make someone kill someone. That's kind of dumb. The US government does not like arcades, and that's why arcade scenes are dying, and it's so hard for arcades to open up a license there because the government is so strict.
There's just this stigma that I'm hoping that we can eradicate, showing the popularity of video games.
So while Americans fight strict regulations and societal pressure, in Japan, game companies flourish with free rein to innovate and design meaningful games for all audiences.
I think games mean more to more people in Japan than they do in America. I think games in Japan early on, they were made to appeal to many people. For example, Pac-Man designer Toru Iwatani, he intentionally made Pac-Man not a game about shooting aliens or not a game about playing tennis, more about just this kind of wacky, cool, stylized character who goes around eating things, which I think I've heard that he made that specifically to appeal to more to women, actually. When traditionally most of the arcade games were famously, you know, alien shooters. You even have a game geared towards, you know, like 50-year-old housewives, basically, who like Korean idols. You know, they have a special pachinko game themed with Yon-sama, which I think you won't get in America anytime soon.
Instead, American arcades were forced to shift gears, becoming quote-unquote family-friendly locations in an attempt to reach a larger audience.
In the 80s, it was that stigma of the arcades being a negative place to go to that arcade owners changed their whole perspective. Like, well, we don't want to be thought of like as D&D was back in the early 80s as some kind of negative influence on kids. We want a happy family type of place. So you have like the Dave & Buster's who catered to adults. You have a family fun center to cater to the whole family. Or like the golf lands in California. I think it was just to bring in more people to say like, well, the video games, they're not bad. These are places where everyone can enjoy them. And then that's really, we saw that shift to that kind of model. I would say the arcade is not relevant, really, to the family of today in America.
Like, we had these grimy arcades, and then, you know, Chuck E. Cheese started taking over, or, you know, sort of eating up these smaller mom-and-pop places. And, you know, some of the experience is lost in those kind of places, in my humble opinion.
The layout and design of arcades in Japan is another potential reason for their continued success. Multiple floors divide up game types, ensuring the best experience possible for a wide array of players.
When I first walk into an arcade, I usually will not see the music games there
per se. I'll usually see the UFO catchers first before I see anything. And then around there, I'll see fighting and racing games off to the side, the horse race simulators, the mahjong games, and all the other bizarre ones off to a side, along with the bingo machines and the metal games, all of those. Music games tend to be in a corner or in some, I wouldn't say isolated, but some set back place of the arcade. Not because the staff necessarily wants to hide them, but because they are very loud, let's be honest. They're blaring music at you. And it can be distracting to other players, especially when you have a number of these machines blaring out in the arcades.
ゲームセンターの環境は結構BGM もお店の BGM もなってますし、いろんなゲームがあるので、これの騒音問題っていうのはずっと最初からありましたね。でもその中でどうやって工夫していくかっていうと、やっぱりこうスピーカーの位置を耳の近くに置いたりとか、もしくは指向性スピーカーをこう置いて自分にしか聞こえないようなシステムを作ったりとかですね。あとはゲームのセンターの中で埋もれないためには逆にあまり音を出さないっていうのが大事なんですね。全部が出てると何を聞かせたいのかわからない。なので出すところは出して出さないところは出さない、そこら辺のこうメリハリをつけることが、ユーザーにこう一番こう伝えられる方法かなと思ってますね。
With nothing left to chance, it is apparent that the design of these arcades are thought out to the very last detail. Ultimately, it is about creating a space that caters to their clientele.
もうサービスしたくてたまらない。でゲームセンターでそこら辺にあるでしょ。もうとにかくあんた今寂しくないかなんか楽しいことないかってしたくてたまらないのね。で多分そこら辺のサービス大好き文化っていうのがこのちっちゃなゲームセンターをいまだに根付かせていてやるんじゃないかとちょっと思います。やっぱりね、アメリカ例えば行ってゲームセンター行くとね、なんか大抵店長がこんな面してんのね。もう遊んでみたいな。でも日本はね給料変わんないのに面白いとか言ってね、お金出ないのにね、なんかそういったこう人を面白がらせてなんかちょっと喜ぶような文化があるのかなとかちょっと思ったり。
The staff are so orderly and it's almost like you're in a casino. They have like proper attire, you know, like a suit tie or a waistcoat and stuff. They look really smart and they're very attentive and they're actually really good at the games. They're not just people walking around cleaning machines. These guys are really top players. Like they can do all the really good combos and stuff like that. I never forget a time when I was there for Virtua Fighter in 1998 and one of the buttons went out on Virtua Fighter. So I asked the guy if he could repair it. And this guy sits down, repairs the button, puts a credit in, and proceeds to like completely batter the opponent by doing all these really stylish combos. And he gets up and he's like, yeah, the button's working now. Just when I saw that, I was really impressed with how they actually make effort to employ people genuinely interested in games, and it's not just someone trying to make a quick buck doing any job. And I like that.
働いてる時はすごく楽しくて、もうゲームを見ながらその仕事ができるので楽しくて。でそのゲーム好きなお客さんが来るわけなんで、そのお客さんともやっぱり話が合うんで、だからすごくやりがいのある楽しい仕事でした。
Much like casinos, Japan's arcades are designed to draw you in and keep you entertained. The hardest part is attracting the mass foot traffic into your establishment. Fortunately, Japan's arcades are built around that very goal.
入り口の近くは UFO キャッチャー、それが一番お客さんがいっぱいいるから UFO キャッチャーは入り口のそばにいっぱいあって、あと音ゲービートマニアとか太鼓の達人とか、そういうゲームセンターにあまり来ない人たちでも楽しめるようなゲームは入り口のそばに置いてありますね。それで地下は、大型のゲーム、競馬ゲームだったりサッカーゲームだったり、地下にあることが多いです。で上に上がっていくにつれてメダルゲームだったりで、大体最上階がビデオゲームですね。だから多分ゲームが好きな人ほど上の階に行くっていう感じです。あまりゲームを普段しない人たちは1階、ゲームが好きな人につれてどんどん上に行くっていうのがゲームセンターの作りになってます。
Even in Japan, we see a shift in business models, with places like Round 1 becoming major players in the arcade industry. Instead of a traditional arcade, at Round 1, you pay by the hour, and you also have access to activities like billiards, bowling, volleyball courts, or batting cages.
Round 1, for example, is open until 5 a.m. It's accessible by walking or by train. They have alcohol there. They have food there. You don't really have to leave anytime soon. So I think for me, why round one can exist is because it's so accessible. I'll go to an arcade because it's in downtown area. So you go drinking, and then after that you go to round one to sing karaoke, and then you just play some arcade games or something. Or for example, you go watch a movie, and then they have this giant amusement center right next to the movie theater, so you can go, spend a good productive 2 hours, playing whatever you want.
ラウンドワンさんみたいな感じのが多分今みんな遊びやすいんで、最終的にはやっぱそうなるんじゃないかなっていうのはあるんですけれども、うちのやっぱセガとしてももしかしたら今以上にもうちょっと普通のお客様またはご年配の方も気軽に遊べるようなやっぱ娯楽施設を作るように努力していければいいかなっていうふうに思います。
So while arcades look for a way to stay relevant, consoles continue to improve, and the home gaming market continues to grow.
で家庭用のゲームがすごく今出来がいいというか優秀なんで、ゲームセンターがこれから増えたり流行ったりするのはすごく大変な時代だろうなと思いますけど。
だからやっぱり皆さんおっしゃってますけども Wii が出てからゲーセンって意味なくなったよねってその通りだと思います。みんな例えば友達集まったら Wii でボーリングとかやってるからね。だから一番最初の意味でのゲームセンターっていうのはちょっともう単純に負けてると思います。でも今ゲーセン行かれたら分かると思うんですけども、ほとんど1階のプリクラと2階のカードゲームで回ってるんですね。Wii が来た時に実はこれでアーケードが終わりだなって商売的には思ったんですけども、内容的にはあんまりでも実際もうそれとは違うところにゲームセンターもなってしまってるしっていうのが大きいと思います。
It's fair to say that Japan's arcades rely on things like crane games and purikura to carry their business year to year. This maintains profitability while waiting for the next big game to arrive. It's the small retro arcades that struggle to maintain a large enough customer base with the influx of consoles.
正直ここのエビセンさんみたいなそういう個人経営でビデオゲーム中心っていうところはちょっと厳しい状況かなというのが正直なところですね。それはよく言われることですけど、家庭用ゲームの性能が上がってきて、もう昔は逆だったんですけど、アーケードじゃなきゃできないゲームっていうのがいっぱいあったけど、今ではもうむしろ家庭用ゲームの方が性能がいいからもうゲームセンターに行く理由がないとか、そういうところもありますし、あとは麻雀ファイトクラブとかそういう人気のある大型のゲームっていうのはやっぱりちょっと値段が高くて、そういう個人のところが入れるにはちょっと厳しいと。
他の国に比べればゲームセンターの数は多いけど、でも10年前に比べるとやっぱりすごい数が減ってますね。でやっぱり UFO キャッチャーとか音ゲームとかそういうのばっかりになっちゃうんじゃないかなと。何かゲームセンターでしかできないような工夫がないと格闘ゲームとかそういうゲームはなくなっちゃうんじゃないかなと思いますね。
今後どうなるかっていうと全く予測ができない。やっぱりコンソールのゲームがすごい充実してくるとコンソールにないものをやっぱしみんな求めてアーケードに来るので、一つはコミュニケーションなんだろうけどもやっぱし新技術新しいものを求めてくると思うんで、新しい技術だからね想像はつかない。もしそういうものが出たらまたアーケードに人がたくさん来るだろうし、そういうものがなかったらちょっとずつ人は減っていくんじゃないかなと思う。
While the future is uncertain, there remains a unique appeal to arcades that is hard to argue.
There's something to be said about walking into a game center, sitting down at a cabinet, knowing on the other side there's a real person, and that takes a certain degree of, bravery, because you might get your ass handed to you. You may destroy the other person. It's that kind of uncertainty. And, if you're playing online, you start getting your butt kicked, you can just rage quit, turn off the machine. You can't do that in an arcade.
今のゲームセンター正直やっぱ厳しいっていうのはあるんですけれども、ただ厳しいからって言ってそこで諦めるんじゃなくて、じゃあお客さんを取り込むまたは顧客を作るためにはどうやったらいいかっていう風でやっぱ毎日考えながらやってますね。
It doesn't have to just be
400 machines all stuffed together and a bunch of people crammed in one area. Open it up, just make it more accessible to not just the hardcore gamer, but the general community as a whole. Japan already has that. They have that in their culture.
My name is Christopher Laporte. I am a Las Vegas local for about 6 years now. We are opening up the Insert Coins Video Lounge Game Bar. I basically spent about a year trying to get the capital to make this happen. And everyone I talked to thought I was basically out of my mind. I said I wanted to open up a bar with video games in it and arcade cabinets, and people looked at me, why would you do that? You know, games are for kids. The fear was arcades died. So why would you try to resuscitate that business model?
The arcade business model isn't perfect. In fact, we have seen several arcades close in Japan in recent years. But for every arcade that closes, 2 new ones open up.
You know, a lot of the news of arcade closures in Japan has been from these mom and pop arcades, because you never hear about a Taito station closing or, you know, a Club Sega closing. You hear about them opening new stores. Like, they just opened a 3rd Sega in Akihabara right next to the train station.
ビデオゲームとカードゲームがドッキングしたカードゲームのカテゴリーが生まれ、新しいカテゴリーが生まれることが相乗効果によって一番トップの売り上げを作れたんだと思う。
New game types always cause a mini resurgence in arcade popularity. And the goal of arcade companies in Japan is to continually evolve their offerings, drawing in new and larger audiences with modern gaming experiences.
数字、レベニュー的なゴールはいくらでもあるんですけど、多分それはあんま面白くないと思う。それよりはアーケードゲームのこう楽しみたいな、遊びたいなっていう人をやっぱり増やしていかなきゃいけないのがうちの会社の、最終ゴールだと思ってます。ですからゲームの不安を徹底的に増やしていく、そういうことに全力で頑張りたいと思います。
日本の今、日本のアニメとか漫画は結構海外にこう流出してるんですが、アーケードゲームもまだ流出してないけれども、それほど、それと匹敵するほど面白い文化だと思うので、ぜひこの一度来てですね、この濃いアニメの世界に負けない濃い世界を味わってもらえたらいいんじゃないかと思います。家で一人でゲームやるのとは違う、そこで世界が垣間見れます。ぜひいらしてください。
Gaming is for the casual, it's for the passerby, or it's for the curious. It's for, you know, someone who's absolutely just obsessed. It doesn't matter. It's a hobby, it's a passion, it's a sport, call it what you will. Video gaming isn't going away. Might be cliche, but the American dream, it's right behind me. You know, I had a vision of something that most people said I was crazy. An arcade is not going to work in the States. And to that I say, you're wrong. The arcades are coming back, they're coming back big. And it's just a different version of it, but it still entails the same thing. It's a place to play video games, have fun with your friends. I think the Japanese might get some inspiration from us in the way we have our console gaming. You know, the way we have the presentation of gaming in terms of an adult entertainment with drinking and, you know, cocktail servers and just upping the ante of what an arcade should be. It's that culture that we're tapping into. So I think it's viable anywhere as long as you have 30-somethings. You know, we were raised on it. I can't stress it enough. It was taboo maybe 30 years ago, but it sure as hell isn't now. And I'm just proud to be part of it. You know, we can make the arcade scene totally return to form of what they used to be in terms of popularity, but even bigger. You have to come and see it to believe it. The Americans they're back. And we'll get you at Evo too, Japanese. You're going down, Daigo.
So we are at Evo 2011, the World Finals, and it's just an amazing gathering of players from, I believe the count is 46 countries here this year. Obviously players from everywhere in North America, all over Asia, Europe, South America. It's really the world's fighting elite and their fans and their competitors. Next generation of Fighting Elite are all here in this room.
We started about 14 years ago in an arcade with 64 people. And we ran a Super Street Fighter 2 tournament, and It's just snowballed over the years and bigger and bigger. And when Street Fighter 4 hit, thousands of people, and then now it's just out of control. So we took Togeki and what they did with arcades, we merged it with our stuff with console, and now we got a huge event, and I think we got the best of both worlds.
イボがやっぱり一番それに向けて練習もするし、一番勝ちたい大会だし、一番盛り上がるし、楽しい好きな大会ですね。
I think the secret's out. EVO is like the place to be every year. It's a world championship, so they want to be the world champion. They're going to keep sending more and more players to take out our players. So it's pretty scary, like when our U.S. players can't even compete anymore.
Yeah, we've seen a massive Japanese presence here. We have a great connection with all the international players. Really respect what they do. But we see a lot of these guys ending up at the top of the tournaments, and it's no special magical Japanese ability. It's they're coming from really one of the ultimate crucibles of fighting game competition.
For a 1,600-man tournament, if you come with like, maybe, I think there were like 12 or something, to have from 12 guys, a third of you make it all the way, that's pretty impressive.
It shows more, I guess, international rivalry, because obviously if you come to America, the Americans probably want to beat the Japanese players mainly, so we're doing pretty good here and there, but the Japanese presence is definitely overwhelming this year.
And their dedication to the game, obviously in particular, Daigo Umehara, who's become a sponsored player and treats it very much like a job. He spends his time in the arcade, he does physical fitness routines just to stay in mental and physical shape, and has just a unique focus, and he's able to bring a real focus and ability. He really has followed a dream and said, this is what I'm good at in life, I'm going to find a way to make this work, and with the support of his sponsor, he's been able to make that happen, and you see the results speak for themselves. He's right at the top of the winner's bracket.
I want to say the safe money is on Daigo because he won 2 years in a row, so I'll go with the safe bet.
Unfortunately, Daigo fell just short of taking his third straight title, finishing in 4th place. And while the rest of the world did their best to compete, a newcomer from Japan stepped up to claim the World Street Fighter 4 Championship. With half of the top 8 being from Japan, it's not hard to see the product of the arcades and their culture. This isn't just about gaming anymore. It's a way of life, and for some, a career. The evolution of arcade gaming, from the inception of Space Invaders through to fighting and rhythm games, has maintained one constant throughout. It is a cultural beacon that forms the foundation of social communities and eclectic subcultures. The worldwide impact of arcades and their culture can be seen in many facets of society, and while in some locales this culture has waned, we are seeing a strong, nostalgia-driven push to reignite the passion that Space Invaders first captured. Professional gaming is on the rise, and arcades have asserted themselves beyond that of a simple hobby. The feelings and emotions that exist within arcades are unique and should be celebrated. This is the arcade experience.